The Indian Ocean was supposed to be quiet. It wasn't. In one of the most audacious and consequential military strikes in recent memory, Iranian forces have struck a United States Navy destroyer operating in the Indian Ocean, taking it out of action and sending shockwaves from Washington to Beijing, from Tel Aviv to Moscow, and through every naval command center on the planet. Let that land for a moment. Iran has struck. An American warship, not a threat, not a warning shot across a diplomatic bow, a direct, confirmed strike on a vessel flying the flag of the most powerful navy in human history, the kind of event that military strategists spend entire careers wargaming and praying never actually happens. The Pentagon is in crisis mode tonight. Senior defense officials were pulled from meetings. Emergency briefings were convened at the highest levels of the United States military command structure. The Joint Chiefs were notified. The White House Situation Room lit up, and across Capitol Hill, phones began ringing before most staffers had finished their morning coffee. This is not a drill. This is not a provocation in the abstract. This is kinetic. This is real. And the decisions made in the next 48 to 72 hours could determine whether this becomes a contained incident or the opening act of something far more dangerous. Here is what we know at this hour. A United States Navy destroyer, operating in the Indian Ocean as part of ongoing regional security operations, was struck by what preliminary assessments suggest was an Iranian missile or drone system. The vessel sustained significant damage and has been taken out of operational action. Casualty figures have not been formally confirmed, but multiple sources indicate American service members were wounded. The extent of those injuries, and whether any lives were lost, remains under urgent assessment. Iran has not issued a formal denial. That silence is itself a statement. The strike did not come without context. It did not emerge from a vacuum. It is the product of decades of escalating tension, of proxy conflicts fought in the shadows, of red lines drawn and redrawn, of a nuclear standoff that never truly resolved, only shifted shape. To understand why this happened, you need to understand the full architecture of the United States-Iran confrontation, and that is exactly what this documentary is going to walk you through. Because this story is not just about one warship in one ocean. It is about the balance of power in the Middle East. It is about America's credibility as a global military force. It is about Iran's calculation that the moment to act has finally arrived. And it is about what the world looks like on the other side of a decision this explosive. We are going to break this down, methodically, factually, and with the analytical depth this moment demands. Timeline, strategy, intelligence, consequences, all of it. If you are watching this channel for the first time, subscribe now. Because this story is going to develop fast, and you are going to want every update the moment it breaks. This is the situation, and it is far from over. To understand what happened in the Indian Ocean, you have to go back. Not weeks, not months, decades. Because this strike, as sudden and shocking as it feels, did not come out of nowhere. It is the product of a relationship between the United States and Iran that has been defined, almost without interruption, by hostility, miscalculation, and escalating confrontation since 1979. That is where the clock starts. 1979. The foundation of enmity. When the Islamic Revolution swept Mohammad Reza Shah from power and installed Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini as supreme leader, it didn't just change Iran's government, it fundamentally restructured Iran's relationship with the United States. The seizure of the American embassy in Tehran and the 444-day hostage crisis that followed burned a wound into the American national consciousness that has never fully healed. From that moment forward, Washington and Tehran were not rivals, they were enemies. Every administration since has had to manage that enmity. None has resolved it. The 1980s, tanker wars, and the USS Stark. The Indian Ocean strike carries an uncomfortable historical echo. In May 1987, an Iraqi warplane, flying in the context of the Iran-Iraq War, struck the USS Stark in the Persian Gulf, killing 37 American sailors. The United States was forced into a humiliating strategic recalibration. A year later, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing 290 civilians, an incident Iran has never forgotten and never forgiven. These events established a pattern. The Persian Gulf and its surrounding waters were not neutral space. They were a theater of confrontation dressed in the language of navigation rights. The 1990s through 2000s. Sanctions, proxies, and the nuclear question. Through the 1990s, the United States pursued Iran through economic strangulation, sanctions, isolation, and the systematic dismantling of Iran's access to global financial systems. Iran responded not with conventional military force, but with asymmetric strategy. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, militia networks across Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. Iran built a constellation of proxy forces, what Tehran calls the axis of resistance, designed to project power and inflict pain without ever requiring a direct confrontation. Then came the nuclear program, and with it, a new dimension of crisis. By the mid-2000s, international inspectors confirmed what intelligence agencies had long suspected. Iran was enriching uranium at levels inconsistent with purely civilian energy needs. The international community mobilized, sanctions tightened, negotiations stumbled forward and collapsed, then stumbled forward again. 2015. The JCPOA and the Illusion of Resolution. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, represented the closest Washington and Tehran had come to a functional framework since 1979. Iran agreed to cap enrichment levels and submit to inspections. Sanctions were rolled back. For a brief window, it appeared the confrontation might be managed, if not resolved. That window closed in 2018. When the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA and reimposed maximum pressure sanctions, Iran responded with methodical escalation. Attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure, seizures of oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, rocket attacks on U.S. bases across Iraq. The assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, ordered by President Trump, brought the two countries to the edge of open war. They pulled back, but the architecture of confrontation remained fully intact. 2024-2025. The pressure builds. As regional tensions intensified through the Gaza conflict, Iranian-backed forces dramatically increased their operational tempo. Houthi forces in Yemen launched sustained missile and drone campaigns against commercial and military shipping in the Red Sea. Iran-backed militias struck U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria repeatedly. Washington responded with airstrikes, naval deployments, and carrier strike group repositioning. The Indian Ocean became an increasingly active theater. U.S. naval assets were repositioned to manage the expanded threat envelope, and Iran, watching, calculating, and probing, continued testing the boundaries of what Washington would absorb without triggering a full military response. Now, in the Indian Ocean, Iran has its answer. Or rather, America must now provide one. Here is what we know. Here is what is disputed, and here is what remains dangerously uncertain. Reconstruct the sequence carefully, because in a crisis of this magnitude, the difference between fact and assumption can mean the difference between a contained incident and a regional war. The setting. The Indian Ocean is not a peripheral theater. In recent years, it has become one of the most strategically contested bodies of water on the planet. It serves as the primary transit corridor for Gulf oil exports moving toward Asian markets. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Strait of Malacca. It is the highway through which roughly 80% of China's imported oil travels. American naval presence in these waters is not symbolic. It is structural, a core pillar of the United States' ability to project power across two continents simultaneously. The destroyer in question was operating as part of a standard regional security patrol, the kind of mission U.S. Navy vessels conduct continuously, in rotations, as part of America's permanent forward presence doctrine. These are not provocative deployments. They are the operational baseline of American naval power. And yet, on this day, in these waters, that baseline was shattered. The strike. What the evidence suggests. Based on preliminary defense assessments and early intelligence reporting, the attack appears to have been executed using a combination of Iranian-developed missile and drone technology. The specific system has not been formally identified at the time of this reporting, but analysts point to two likely candidates: the Shaheed series of loitering munitions, which Iran has deployed with devastating effect in multiple theaters, or a variant of the Noor anti-ship missile system derived from the Chinese C-802 platform and modified by Iranian defense engineers over 2 decades of development. The strike was not random. The precision required to locate, target, and hit a moving naval vessel in open ocean requires significant intelligence infrastructure, satellite reconnaissance, signals interception, or human intelligence assets with access to U.S. naval movement patterns. This was not opportunistic. This was planned. The destroyer sustained significant structural damage. Onboard systems were disrupted. The vessel was rendered non-operational and required immediate emergency protocols. Reports indicate that damage control teams worked under extreme conditions to stabilize the ship and prevent further catastrophic failure. What the United States is saying. The Pentagon's initial response was measured, deliberately so. Official statements confirmed the strike had occurred, confirmed the vessel was damaged and taken out of operational action, and confirmed that an investigation was underway to establish full attribution. The language was careful, the tone was controlled, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Senior defense officials described the strike as an unprovoked act of aggression against a United States military asset operating in international waters. The phrase, unprovoked, is doing significant diplomatic work in that sentence. It is the framing Washington needs to justify whatever response it chooses to authorize. The Secretary of Defense was briefed immediately. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs convened an emergency session. The National Security Council activated its crisis protocols. Multiple congressional leaders were notified through classified briefing channels. What Iran is, and is not, saying. Tehran's response has been conspicuous in its ambiguity. There has been no formal claim of responsibility, no press conference, no triumphant statement from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which would typically be the operational arm of an action of this kind. Instead, silence. Calculated, deliberate, strategic silence. That silence is a message in itself. In Iranian strategic doctrine, maintaining ambiguity after a strike serves multiple purposes. It allows Tehran to gauge the American response before committing to a public posture. It denies Washington a clean political target for retaliation, and it preserves the option for Iran to either escalate further or offer a quiet diplomatic off-ramp, depending on how the next 48 hours unfold. Iranian state media, meanwhile, published commentary describing American naval presence in the region as inherently provocative, language that stops short of claiming responsibility while simultaneously justifying the action to a domestic audience. The uncertainties that matter. Several critical questions remain unanswered at this hour. Were American service members killed? The Pentagon has not confirmed fatalities, but the damage described is severe, and the probability of casualties is significant. If American lives were lost, the political and military calculus in Washington shifts dramatically. Was this ordered at the highest levels of the Iranian government, by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself? Or was this an IRGC operation executed with a degree of autonomous authority? That distinction matters enormously for how the United States structures its response. And was this a standalone strike? Or the opening move in a broader operational sequence? That last question is the one keeping senior Pentagon officials awake tonight. To grasp the full weight of what just happened in the Indian Ocean, you have to think beyond the immediate damage to one vessel. You have to think in terms of architecture, the architecture of American military power, the architecture of Iranian strategic ambition, and the architecture of a global order that has been quietly fracturing for years. Because this strike was not just an attack on a ship, it was an attack on a doctrine. The doctrine of forward presence. For decades, the cornerstone of American naval strategy has been what military planners call forward presence, the continuous deployment of naval assets into contested and critical regions before a crisis develops, not in response to one. The logic is straightforward and historically validated. When American warships are visible in strategic waterways, adversaries calculate the cost of aggression differently. The carrier strike group anchored off a coastline is not just a weapons platform, it is a signal, a deterrent, a message written in steel and delivered at 30 knots. Iran has just challenged that message directly. By striking a U.S. Navy destroyer in open ocean, not in a constrained choke point, not in the chaos of a proxy engagement, but in the vast operational theater of the Indian Ocean, Iran has demonstrated something that fundamentally complicates American strategic planning. It has demonstrated reach, it has demonstrated targeting capability, and it has demonstrated the willingness to use both against a primary American military asset. That combination, reach, precision, and will, is what keeps naval strategists awake at night. The Indian Ocean as strategic terrain. The Indian Ocean is not merely a body of water. It is the connective tissue of the global economy. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil transit through the Indian Ocean corridor every single day. The majority of that flow originates in Gulf-producing states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and moves eastward toward the energy-hungry markets of China, India, Japan, and South Korea. Disrupt that flow, and you do not just inconvenience energy traders. You destabilize the industrial output of half the world's largest economies. Beyond energy, the Indian Ocean carries a staggering volume of containerized trade: electronics, pharmaceuticals, agricultural commodities, consumer goods. The supply chains that stock shelves in Chicago, London, and Tokyo pass through these waters. American naval dominance in the Indian Ocean is not abstract geopolitical positioning. It is the operational guarantee that underwrites global commerce. Iran understands this, which is precisely why this theater was chosen. The destroyer's operational role. U.S. Navy destroyers are not passive patrol vessels. They are among the most capable multi-mission warships in the world. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the workhorse of the U.S. surface fleet, carries Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles capable of striking targets over 1,000 miles inland. It carries standard missile systems designed to intercept ballistic missiles in flight. It carries anti-submarine warfare systems, electronic warfare suites, and an integrated combat management network that connects it in real time to satellites, aircraft, and other naval vessels across the theater. Removing one from operational action does not just eliminate a weapons platform. It creates a gap in the integrated defensive and offensive architecture of the entire regional force posture. Other vessels must reposition, coverage areas contract, response timelines extend. The adversary gains room to maneuver. Iran knows exactly what it removed from the board: the IRGC Navy, an asymmetric force built for this moment. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is not a conventional naval force. It was never designed to compete with the United States fleet in a symmetrical engagement, because that competition would be suicidal. Instead, over 4 decades, Iran built something far more dangerous in the specific context of regional conflict: a highly capable asymmetric naval force optimized for harassment, disruption, and precision strikes against high-value targets in constrained and semi-open maritime environments. Fast attack craft operating in swarm formations. Midget submarines capable of shallow water operations. An expanding inventory of anti-ship missiles with increasingly sophisticated guidance systems. Drone technology refined through years of operational deployment in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. The IRGC Navy is not a force designed to win a naval war. It is a force designed to make a naval war catastrophically expensive for the United States to prosecute. Today, in the Indian Ocean, it demonstrated that its operational envelope has expanded well beyond the Persian Gulf. The regional strategic picture, redrawn. Prior to this strike, American naval planners operated on a working assumption that Iran's most dangerous maritime capabilities were concentrated in and around the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. The Indian Ocean was considered a secondary threat environment. Assets were deployed accordingly. That assumption must now be formally revised. If Iran can strike a U.S. destroyer in the Indian Ocean, the threat perimeter for American naval operations in the entire region has expanded dramatically. Every vessel operating between the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Malacca must now be considered potentially within Iranian targeting range. Force protection protocols will be reviewed, deployment patterns will be reassessed, and the resource demands of maintaining credible deterrence across a suddenly enlarged threat environment will place new pressure on an already stretched naval force. The strategic map has been redrawn tonight, and the United States is only beginning to understand the full dimensions of what that means. When an event of this magnitude occurs, the immediate instinct is to focus on the military hardware, the missile, the damage, the vessel. But the most important analytical work happens at a different level entirely. It happens in the intelligence community assessments circulating through classified channels. It happens in the think tanks and security institutes where career analysts spend their lives mapping the decision-making architecture of adversarial states. It happens in the quiet, careful judgments of military strategists who have spent decades studying Iranian doctrine, Iranian capability, and Iranian intent. Those voices matter enormously right now, because what they are saying, and what they are warning, shapes the decisions that will be made in Washington in the coming hours and days. The intelligence community assessment. Within the intelligence community, the immediate analytical priority is attribution, not in the broad sense of identifying Iran as the responsible party, which the evidence already strongly suggests, but in the precise operational sense. Who gave the order? At what level of the Iranian command structure was this authorized? Was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei personally involved in sanctioning a direct strike on a U.S. Navy vessel? Or did the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps execute this operation with a degree of operational autonomy that even Tehran's senior leadership is now scrambling to manage? That distinction is not academic. It is the central variable in the American response calculus. If Khamenei personally authorized this strike, it represents a deliberate strategic decision at the highest level of the Iranian state, a conscious choice to cross a threshold that has remained uncrossed for decades. That reading demands a response calibrated to re-establish deterrence at the highest level. If, however, the IRGC acted with significant operational independence, a pattern that has precedent in Iranian military history, the response calculus shifts. It opens, however narrowly, the possibility of a diplomatic communication that separates the Iranian state from the action, providing both sides a potential off-ramp from full escalation. Intelligence analysts are working urgently to resolve that question. The answer will drive everything that follows. Think Tank and Geopolitical Institute analysis. Analysts at major international security institutes have been tracking the trajectory of Iranian maritime aggression for years, and their assessments in the wake of this strike carry a common thread of grim validation. The prevailing analytical consensus is that Iran has been systematically testing the boundaries of American tolerance for escalation since the collapse of the JCPOA in 2018. Each escalatory step, the tanker seizures, the Aramco strikes, the attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, the Houthi campaign in the Red Sea, was designed to probe Washington's response threshold while maintaining enough ambiguity to avoid triggering a decisive American military reaction. Analysts warn that Iran may have now concluded, based on years of careful observation, that the United States is unwilling to absorb the domestic political and economic costs of a full military confrontation. That calculation, if accurate, is extraordinarily dangerous. It means Tehran believes it has identified a window of strategic opportunity, a moment when American political division, military overextension, and economic sensitivity to oil price shocks create conditions under which a direct strike on a U.S. Navy vessel is survivable for the Iranian regime. Whether that calculation is correct is the defining question of this crisis. Military analyst perspectives. Senior military analysts with direct experience in naval operations and Middle East Theater Command have offered a consistent assessment in the hours following the strike. The United States is facing a credibility crisis of the first order. American deterrence in the Middle East and Indian Ocean region rests on a foundational assumption: that attacking a U.S. military asset carries consequences so severe and so certain that no rational adversary would risk it. That assumption has now been directly challenged. The credibility of American deterrence is not an abstract concept. It is the operating system of American military power. When it is questioned, allies grow uncertain, adversaries grow emboldened, and the entire architecture of regional security begins to shift. Military analysts emphasize that the American response must be sufficient to restore that credibility, but calibrated carefully enough to avoid triggering a full-scale conflict that serves neither American strategic interests nor regional stability. That is an extraordinarily narrow path to navigate, and the margin for error is essentially zero. Academic and policy expert views. Policy scholars who have spent careers studying Iranian decision-making offer an additional layer of analytical context that is essential to understanding this moment. Iran's strategic culture is not impulsive. It is deeply calculated, deeply patient, and deeply informed by a reading of history that places the Islamic Republic in a permanent state of existential confrontation with the United States. Iranian leaders do not make decisions of this magnitude, striking a U.S. Navy vessel in open ocean, without extensive deliberation and without a theory of how the subsequent moves play out. That means Iran entered this moment with a prepared response architecture. It has anticipated American reaction options. It has pre-positioned diplomatic messaging. It has coordinated, at least in general terms, with its network of regional partners. Russia, potentially China at the political level, and its constellation of proxy forces across the Middle East. Policy experts warn that the United States must resist the temptation to respond in ways that Iran has already wargamed and prepared for. The strategic challenge is not simply to respond forcefully. It is to respond in a way that Iran did not anticipate, did not prepare for, and cannot easily absorb. That requires a level of strategic creativity and political discipline that Washington has not always demonstrated in moments of acute crisis. The signal buried in the silence. Perhaps the most telling analytical observation in the hours since this strike is the one that focuses not on what Iran has done, but on what Iran has not said. The absence of a formal claim of responsibility is itself an intelligence data point of the highest significance. It tells analysts that Iran is operating in a mode of strategic ambiguity, keeping its options open, watching the American response, and preparing to adjust its posture based on what Washington does next. That is not the behavior of a state that has lost control of events. That is the behavior of a state that believes it is managing them. But the other side has a point, and in a crisis of this complexity, intellectual honesty demands that we examine it seriously. Not to excuse what happened, not to minimize the gravity of a strike on a United States Navy vessel, but because understanding the full picture is the only way to accurately assess where this situation is heading and what a durable resolution might actually look like. Because there is another way to read this moment, and that reading deserves careful, rigorous examination.